Breaking today, Meghan Markle breaks her agreement with King Charles and Buckingham Palace to leak to her friends at
Meghan Markle's latest claim about her relationship with the United Kingdom appeared carefully worded, deeply personal, and impossible to ignore. But behind the emotional language was a troubling contradiction, one that reportedly sent royal aides searching through old messages, private schedules, and decisions the public was never meant to examine. According to Meghan's version, an important understanding had already been reached. She had been willing to cooperate. She had accepted the conditions placed before her, prepared herself emotionally, and believed a difficult door back into Britain had finally opened. Then, without warning, the opportunity was taken away. No honest explanation. No direct conversation. Only another cold decision made somewhere behind palace walls. The claim struck at the most painful parts of the Sussex story: security, family access, royal status, the possibility of returning without surrendering dignity. And beneath all of it was Meghan's long-held belief that palace officials had controlled not only where she could stand, but how the world was allowed to see her. At first, the account sounded painfully familiar. It fit the public story of a woman who had entered the monarchy with confidence, only to leave feeling isolated, restricted, and repeatedly blamed for tensions she believed had existed long before her arrival. For many, there was no reason to doubt her. The emotional pattern seemed complete, but inside royal offices, the reaction was very different. Former aides reportedly noticed the timing almost immediately. The meetings Meghan appeared to reference did not seem to fall in the order she described. Certain private arrangements had not yet been finalized. Some conversations were still continuing when, according to her account, the final rejection had already taken place. Then came something even more troubling. Specific phrases in Meghan's statement reportedly sounded familiar to people who had once worked close to the palace. The wording appeared to echo a confidential exchange, language that had never been released publicly and was believed to have remained inside a very small circle. Harry reacted with instinctive fury. To him, questions about the timeline were not innocent. They were another attempt to weaken Meghan, humiliate her, and turn her pain into a debate over technical details. He had watched that pattern before, and he was determined not to let it happen again. Yet his loyalty only increased the pressure. Palace staff knew that any public denial could force them to reveal private correspondence involving senior royals. Silence looked suspicious, but answering could expose far more than Meghan's claim. The palace was no longer simply worried about an allegation. It was worried about what journalists, former employees, and investigators might uncover while trying to prove or disprove it. Because the real question was no longer whether Meghan had felt rejected. It was whether the decision she described had ever happened in the way she now remembered it. And as old calendars were quietly compared with Meghan's new account, one missing detail began transforming an emotional allegation into a far more dangerous question. The palace had survived accusations before, but timelines were different. Feelings could be debated, memories could change, and motives could remain hidden. Dates, however, left traces. And when Meghan's version was placed beside private schedules from the same week, the first major crack allegedly appeared. The days surrounding the disputed claim were crowded with private calls, travel discussions, security reviews, and carefully guarded conversations between representatives in Britain and the United States. Nothing moved quickly. Every possibility passed through several hands, and every answer seemed to arrive wrapped in conditions. Meghan's account depended on one crucial belief: she had been ready to return to the United Kingdom, or take part in a significant royal-related event, before palace officials suddenly blocked the arrangement. In her version, the decision had already been made. Her cooperation had been offered. Then, the door was closed. But a confidential planning document reportedly told a different story. According to those familiar with it, no final invitation had been approved when Meghan believed it was withdrawn. The proposal was still being examined, divided between two separate palace operations. One dealt with family arrangements and the wishes of senior royals. The other controlled security, protocol, access, and the public consequences of Meghan's presence. That division mattered. Inside the monarchy, responsibility could be scattered so widely that no single office appeared to reject anything. One department could say the family had not objected. Another could insist that security had not been settled. A third could claim public arrangements were never completed. When the plan collapsed, everyone could deny being the person who ended it. To Meghan, that ambiguity may have felt painfully familiar. She had long believed that vague language was used as a weapon, offering enough hope to keep her cooperative, but never enough certainty to hold anyone accountable. A preliminary discussion could sound like an agreement. A warm private message could feel like approval. Yet inside palace records, it remained unofficial. One former aide reportedly remembered Meghan asking for written confirmation. The response was cautious. The matter was still being discussed among senior households. No promise, no refusal, only delay. Harry rejected that interpretation. He reportedly insisted that verbal assurances had already been given and that officials were now rewriting the sequence because the claim had become public. To him, the absence of paperwork did not erase what had been said privately. But then, attention turned to a second communication, sent before the alleged rejection. Its wording suggested Meghan may not have believed the arrangement was secure at all. If authentic, it could reveal whether she expected the visit to proceed or already feared it was slipping away. But the deeper the timeline was examined, the less the controversy appeared to be about a cancelled invitation, and the more it began to resemble a struggle over who controlled the original story. At the center of the contradiction stood Prince Harry, caught between the woman he had vowed to protect and the family whose private rules he understood better than anyone. What he allegedly promised Meghan in private may have shaped the claim now causing chaos on both sides of the Atlantic. For years, Harry had served as the fragile bridge between two worlds that no longer trusted each other. Meghan looked to him for clarity, while the palace relied on him to understand that royal language rarely meant exactly what it appeared to mean. A warm conversation was not approval. A private expression of sympathy was not an official commitment. But translating those differences became almost impossible when emotion entered the room. Harry had reportedly assured Meghan that a return to Britain could be arranged. Perhaps it involved a family meeting, a private visit, or an appearance connected to the monarchy. The conditions seemed manageable, security would need to be settled, publicity controlled, and senior households informed. Harry believed those obstacles could be overcome. More importantly, he believed his father was willing. King Charles may have spoken with the concern of a parent, expressing hope that some form of contact could be restored. But the king's private feelings did not automatically become palace policy. Every decision involving Harry and Meghan carried larger consequences: titles, access, protection, public money, and the reputation of the crown itself. Harry may have heard possibility and understood permission. Meghan trusted him. While aides continued recording the proposal as unresolved, she began preparing for something she believed had already crossed the line from discussion to agreement. Two realities were now moving side by side. In California, the plan felt real. Inside the palace, it remained conditional. That difference would become devastating. Meghan's later account may not have been based on a formal letter or direct promise from palace officials. It may have come almost entirely from what Harry told her. And once he realized the certainty he had offered could no longer be supported, admitting it would mean more than correcting a misunderstanding. It would mean confessing that he had failed to protect her from disappointment yet again. For Meghan, The frustration reached far beyond one disputed arrangement. She believed royal ambiguity had always worked this way: hope delivered privately, responsibility denied publicly, and silence used to make her appear unreasonable when expectations collapsed. Then, another figure entered the calculation. Prince William reportedly questioned whether Meghan's return would create a new media storm and weaken boundaries the family had fought to establish. His concerns may have changed the direction of the discussions. But they could not explain everything. Because Meghan's version contained a detail that seemed to come from a decision made later. Then came the discovery that changed the direction of the entire controversy. Meghan had publicly described a decision that, according to the emerging timeline, had not yet happened. The contradiction was buried inside a single detail most viewers would never notice. Meghan appeared to describe the reason her UK plan had been rejected, but that reason was reportedly discussed only after she had already stepped away. Somehow, her claim contained an explanation before the palace had officially created one. That was the moment the story stopped being a simple dispute over memory. According to the emerging sequence, Meghan presented the arrangement as something already confirmed, then withdrawn for a clear and specific reason. But palace records reportedly suggested something very different. The proposal had remained conditional, no final commitment had been issued, and the explanation she later described did not appear until after the discussions had already collapsed. The inconsistency did not prove that Meghan's sense of rejection was false. Her disappointment may have been completely real, but it raised serious questions about how separate events had been joined together and presented as one direct betrayal. There had been an initial conversation in which a possible return was discussed. Then came Harry's private assurance that the plan could work. Finally, much later, palace officials reached a decision and produced their formal reasoning. In Meghan's version, those 3 stages appeared compressed into a single moment. A promise was made, she agreed, and the monarchy suddenly broke its word. That version carried far greater emotional power. It created a clear offer, a clear betrayal, and a clear institution responsible for the pain. There was no confusion, no uncertainty, and no divided authority. Only Meghan on one side and the palace on the other. But the most damaging possibility was harder to dismiss. Meghan may have learned the later justification through Harry or another confidential contact, then absorbed it into her understanding of the earlier conversation. Over time, what happened afterward may have become inseparable from what she believed had happened before. Emotion, distance, and repeated retellings could have reshaped the sequence without changing the hurt behind it. Palace insiders, however, focused on something colder. Her wording. Certain phrases reportedly resembled language from an internal briefing written only after the proposal had failed. If that was true, someone had shared information that was never intended to leave royal offices. Was it misunderstood, reframed, or deliberately used to make Meghan's public account more convincing? Harry now faced an impossible choice. Defending every detail could force him to expose private conversations with his father. Remaining silent would allow suspicion to gather around Meghan. And beneath both choices waited the same unsettling truth. Someone outside the official decision-making circle appeared to know the original proposal and the palace's later explanation. Yet exposing the contradiction did not settle the dispute. It opened a far more explosive investigation into who had carried confidential palace language across the Atlantic. Only a handful of people reportedly knew the palace's private reasoning, and not all of them remained loyal to the institution. As suspicion moved from Meghan's words to the source behind them, attention turned toward a former insider carrying years of resentment, unfinished business, and access to dangerous secrets. This individual had once operated close enough to both the Sussex household and senior palace officials to understand how decisions were really made. Preliminary discussions were often recorded in soft, careful language. Nothing sounded final. Nothing looked hostile. But once senior royals became involved, the wording could harden overnight, turning a possibility into a warning and a private concern into an official barrier. That knowledge made the former insider unusually dangerous. According to those who remembered the period, this person may have warned Harry that the proposal would never be approved, even while formal conversations were still continuing. To Harry, that warning may have sounded like proof that the outcome had already been decided in secret. To Meghan, it may have confirmed her deepest fear, that palace officials were pretending to negotiate while quietly preparing to shut the door. The language mattered. Certain phrases later used in Meghan's account reportedly resembled the way this insider had described the palace's concerns, the risk of public confusion, the danger of weakened boundaries, and the fear that one exception could reopen questions the monarchy believed had already been settled. But why was that information shared? Perhaps it was offered as emotional support by someone who believed Meghan had been treated unfairly. Perhaps it was strategic advice intended to help the Sussexes understand the machinery working against them. Or perhaps it was something darker, an attempt by a resentful former employee to wound the institution that had once demanded silence and loyalty. Inside the palace, the possible leak became more frightening than Meghan's original claim. Challenging her publicly would require proving when the internal reasoning had been written. That could expose messages, identify who had access, and reveal rivalries among royal households. Former staff were already divided. Some believed Meghan had been deliberately cornered by vague promises and private resistance. Others felt she repeatedly transformed confidential discussions into public accusations, stripping away context while preserving maximum emotional force. Behind them stood another conflict, aides loyal to different royal households blaming one another for the collapse in trust. Each side insisted the others had leaked, interfered, or misrepresented what senior royals wanted. For Meghan, insider knowledge may have felt like validation. Even if the literal sequence remained uncertain, it seemed to confirm the betrayal she believed had always existed beneath the palace's careful words. And the trail did not end with one failed proposal. It pointed backward, to older disputes over titles, financial support, inheritance expectations, and access to future family ceremonies. And once the possible source was traced back to an earlier palace conflict, Meghan's disputed claim began to look less like an isolated statement and more like the latest move in a much longer battle. Behind the disputed dates and private messages was a conflict far larger than one cancelled plan. Meghan and Harry were still fighting over what their departure had taken from them: status, access, protection, influence, and the right to decide how their children would be remembered within royal history. Their exit had ended their formal role, but it had not ended the palace's power over their story. Meghan believed the monarchy could still shape her identity from a distance. Titles could be emphasized or quietly ignored. Invitations could be offered too late to accept. Family contact could remain hidden, while public silence made separation appear entirely of her own choosing. To her, every ceremony carried a message. Attendance at a major family event could suggest forgiveness, continuing relevance, or a place still waiting inside the royal circle. Absence could mean something colder. It could signal that the distance was no longer temporary, but part of the monarchy's permanent design. For Harry, the loss ran even deeper. His struggle over inheritance was not simply about money or property. It was about belonging. He had been born into a story stretching back generations, yet he now faced the possibility that his children might inherit the names without inheriting the connection, the traditions, or the private memories that gave those names meaning. That made even a private UK visit politically dangerous. If Meghan entered a royal residence, who had approved it? If publicly funded security was involved, who would defend the cost? If she met the king, would it be a family reunion or an unofficial return? Even a greeting could become evidence of restored status. Nothing remained personal once it touched the crown. William reportedly saw the risk clearly. Every exception could become a precedent. Every private kindness could later be presented as proof that Harry and Meghan deserved royal privileges without accepting the limits attached to them. From his perspective, the boundaries had to remain firm or they would slowly disappear. Charles faced a more painful choice. As monarch, he had to defend the institution. As a father, he feared that delay could harden into permanent loss, not only of Harry, but of a meaningful relationship with his grandchildren. Meghan's disputed claim may therefore have served a larger purpose. By making the alleged rejection public, she could pressure the palace to define its position before another ceremony, anniversary, or family milestone forced the issue. But the contradiction weakened that pressure. Palace officials could now avoid direct negotiation by claiming that trust had been damaged and the sequence misrepresented. And for Harry, a darker question was beginning to form. Were there public challenges forcing the palace toward reconciliation, or giving it every reason to keep the door closed? But while the palace calculated the institutional damage, the most painful consequences were unfolding privately between Harry and Meghan themselves. Publicly, Harry and Meghan appeared united against the latest challenge. Privately, the contradiction forced them toward a conversation neither could easily survive. If Harry admitted the palace never made the promise Meghan believed existed, he would expose his own role in creating the expectation that shattered her trust. For years, Harry had been Meghan's main connection to the royal family's private intentions. He explained what silence meant, who still cared, which conversations carried weight, and when a cautious remark from his father might signal something more. That responsibility placed him in an impossible position. He was not merely passing along information. He was translating hope. Meghan had acted on those assurances before, only to watch them weaken once palace officials became involved. A private willingness suddenly became a misunderstanding. A possible meeting turned into a discussion that had never been approved. Each time, she was left carrying the public disappointment while the institution protected itself through careful wording. Harry believed he had been honest. But honesty was not the same as accuracy. He may have confused a father's warmth with a monarch's approval, or informal hope with an official promise. Inside the family, those differences were understood without explanation. Outside it, they could destroy trust. Now Meghan faced a frightening possibility. If the timeline was challenged, she could appear dishonest even if she had sincerely repeated what Harry told her. Admitting uncertainty would weaken her claim. Defending every detail could pull Harry deeper into the contradiction. There was also another possibility. Harry may have advised her to simplify the sequence before speaking publicly. The complete version involved private calls, emotional assurances, palace conditions, and sensitive conversations with his father. Compressing it protected those exchanges, but it also made the story sound far more definite than the evidence allowed. Meghan saw the criticism as part of an old pattern. Once again, the palace remained protected while her credibility was placed on trial. Harry, meanwhile, privately resented the system that had created such confusion. Royal language allowed everyone to hear possibility without anyone accepting responsibility for a promise. Their public unity concealed a growing disagreement. Meghan wanted a decisive answer. She could release documents, identify the intermediaries, and force the palace to respond. Harry feared that revealing private messages from Charles would destroy the last fragile path back to his family. Doing nothing carried its own danger. Silence could allow suspicion to harden into judgment. And while they debated whether to fight, explain, or wait, the palace appeared to be preparing something colder than a direct denial. It would not accuse Meghan. It would not call her dishonest. It would simply remove the foundation beneath her story and allow the public to reach its own conclusion. as the Sussexes debated whether silence would protect them or condemn them. The palace prepared its most powerful weapon, a response so restrained that its absence of accusation became the accusation itself. The palace did not release private emails, it did not call Meghan dishonest, and it did not defend every official involved. Instead, it allowed one carefully chosen sentence to reach the public, a sentence that quietly dismantled the certainty of Meghan's claim while protecting the secrets hidden behind it. The response was cold, restrained, and almost painfully simple. No finalized arrangement had existed. Every discussion, it suggested, remained dependent on security, scheduling, and wider family considerations. Nothing in those words directly accused Meghan of inventing her account. Yet the message was unmistakable. If no agreement had been completed, then nothing official could have been withdrawn. The palace had challenged the foundation of her story without entering a public fight it might not be able to control. Almost immediately, the reaction divided. Former royal staff and commentators who already questioned Meghan's version saw the statement as confirmation that the timeline had been compressed. To them, the truth was now clear: an informal possibility, Harry's private confidence, and a later institutional refusal had been merged into one dramatic promise followed by betrayal. Others saw something more familiar and more disturbing. They believed the palace was once again hiding behind technical language. A promise did not need to exist on official paper to shape someone's decisions. Meghan may have acted on private assurances, only to discover that the institution could deny responsibility because the final approval had never been written. The contradiction left three possibilities, and none offered comfort. Meghan may have misunderstood what was being offered. Harry may have overstated how willing his family truly was. Or the story may have been deliberately simplified to create the strongest possible public impact. But even that did not clear the palace. Its secretive methods had helped create the confusion. Senior figures spoke through intermediaries, expressed hope without commitment, and allowed emotionally charged conversations to remain undefined. The system protected the crown, but it also ensured that disappointment could later be dismissed as misunderstanding. Charles avoided a public confrontation. Privately, however, tighter controls were reportedly placed around future communication with Harry. Sensitive discussions would no longer travel through casual calls or emotional conversations without clear conditions. William supported an even firmer boundary. No future arrangement involving the Sussexes should be discussed without written terms, several witnesses, and a record of exactly what had, and had not, been promised. For Harry, that may have been the most painful consequence. Every future conversation with his father would now carry the weight of evidence. Trust had become documentation. Family had become procedure. And still, the palace refused to answer the darkest question. It may have challenged Meghan's sequence, but it never revealed why the original discussions collapsed, or who ensured reconciliation remained nothing more than a private possibility. Because in the royal family, the most damaging story is rarely the one proven false, it is the one whose missing pieces reveal how many people had something to hide.